So welcome everyone, and this week we're reading Parshat Toldot, and the subject of our class tonight is going to be a famous aphorism. And you see even a graphic that, I like this graphic because it shows the actual, the idea in a graphic way. What goes around comes around. But before we get into the story of Jacob, a very dramatic story of Yaakov and Esav, I owe you something from last week. And I was going to show you a musical connection to the idea that we talked about last week. We didn't have time, so I want to do it tonight. So I want to pull up the main idea that we came across last week. We talked about the servant, the man. The protagonist of the story is not named for the entire story, the entire 67 verses. It's unheard of in the Bible. I can't think of any other story where the protagonist is unnamed. And I suggested that this is democratizing the biblical narrative. You don't have to be a forefather, a patriarch, a matriarch, a prophet. You could be an anonymous servant and you can shine. You can be the main hero, the one who brought Rebecca to Isaac, the one who basically, thanks to him, Abraham's progeny continued, and he was able to have a family and continue the promises, the divine promises. And there's a musical idea that correlates to this idea that anyone can shine. And it's a piece that was written by, do you see the picture of Bela Bartok?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hungarian composer, and lived the first half of the 20th century. And he came up with this very novel idea about what the concerto can be. Because up until his day, the concerto was a piece for a soloist who shined, and then the orchestra just accompanied him or had a conversation with him. But nobody paid attention to the members of the orchestra themselves. And now I want to bring in the current conductor of the Israel Philharmonic to tell us how Bartok revolutionized the concept of concerto. So let's see how he explains it.
And we should be very thankful to Serge Koussevitzky, the Russian conductor, who knew the situation of Bartok and who was a great admirer of Bartok.
Let's go back a little bit.
York.
He immigrated from Hungary to New York.
A very good life in Budapest and went to New York, where he was not well known and not very popular as a composer. And we should be very thankful to Serge Koussevitzky, the Russian conductor, who knew the situation of Bartok and who was a great admirer of Bartok. And he, with the Boston Symphony, they commissioned the Concerto for Orchestra from Bartok, who somehow, in this final year of his life, in very poor health, was able to produce one of the most uplifting and charming pieces of music in the 20th century. And unfortunately, he died a few months afterwards, and this piece became his most popular piece and his most successful one, and made him one of the most popular composers in the world of the 20th century. We all know that concerto means a piece for a soloist or a group of soloists and an orchestra. Just like it was from the time of the Baroque, from Bach, Vivaldi, through Mozart, Beethoven, and so on, through the whole Romantic period. And then comes Bartok and writes this concerto for orchestra, which is a bit bizarre when you think about it, but actually then it allows him to write sort of a symphony, but giving really every individual musician of the orchestra a chance to express themselves as if they're playing a concerto. And not only the usual soloists of the orchestra, for example, first oboe, first clarinet, first flute, which anyway usually gets a solo in every piece, but also the second players or the couples of the winds together, every individual brass member from the brass section, each group of the strings, and he's using different ways to achieve that. And at the end, it's a piece that is a great showpiece for any orchestra. The first movement starts with what we call night music, which comes very often in Bartok's music. Starts with the cello and basses. And then just mysterious color on top of it. In the second movement is a moment mainly of the woodwind section. Each group is playing in a different interval. You know, in music we have different intervals, from a very small interval, bigger, until...
Okay. So I thought this really connects to the idea of the unnamed hero of chapter 24 in Bereshit, because again, it's anybody can shine. And Bartok was saying, when they play this piece that Lahav talked about, nobody really knows the names of all these orchestra players who Bartok lets them shine. So it's kind of very similar to this idea that, yeah, we don't need to have a hero with a name. We can sometimes we let people, anonymous people, shine, and that teaches us the value of every human being. And also, you know, his explanations are very interesting. So if I had listened to this piece without his explanation, I wouldn't notice all these things. And that's kind of also similar to studying Torah. You can read the verses, but when you study them and you look at commentaries and you look at questions and difficulties, it opens a whole new world to you. Just like Lahav Shani opened a whole new world to me when I heard this mini lecture about Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra. So now let's talk about today's Parsha, this week's Parsha. This is Parsha Toldot, and our subject is what goes around comes around. So let's start from the end. Let's start from how this drama ended in a very bad way. And do you see the slides? No, wait, hold on.
Not yet.
Wait 1 second. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. How did it end? When Rebecca persuaded Yaakov to deceive his father, and then when Esav discovered and get the blessing that was intended for Esav, and when Esav discovered the ruse and how Jacob tricked his father, the Torah tells us about a scream. He cried out the very great and bitter cry. And he asks his father to give him a blessing. His father says, okay, I'll give you, but it's a secondary blessing. It's a blessing that acknowledges that Jacob will be the one who will rule over him. So it's not the blessing that he wanted. In the next part of the story, he's so furious, he feels so cheated that the Torah says, Vayomer Esav belibo, yikremu yemei evel avi ve'aharga et Yaakov achi. Esav said in his heart, let the days of mourning for my father draw near, and then I will kill Yaakov, my brother. And then Rebecca hears, somehow she hears about it. It's not clear how she hears if he said it in his heart, right? So that's a separate issue. And then she tells him, you should run away to your uncle Lavan. But here's the question. How did twins who grew up together in the same household, the same resources, reach this low where there's deceit and now a threat of murder? How did this happen? They all grew up in the same house. They shared the same, they all had the same income, or you know, as a family,
to me, it's very simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is the period of primogeniture. The firstborn gets it all. I mean, what's so complicated?
And
And if parents show, even today, parents show preference for one child over another, the child who does not get that preference is not a happy camper, and they can show it in different ways. This was a man who was very physical, and he was a hunter, and would, and this is how he showed it. Somebody else might show it in a different way, sneaky.
And Shammai, I think you're asking the question backwards. I would ask the question, how doesn't it happen in a family?
That's great.
Really?
Yeah. So I want to follow up on Joan's answer. Let's go back a little bit to how they were raised. I mean, they were waiting for children. She was barren, Rivka, for so many years. You would think once she has twins, a double blessing, she'll be extra careful, both she and Yitzchak, to treat them both with love, to nurture both of them. But no, that's not what happened. And as Joan pointed out, let's read the verses. Vayehav Yitzchak et Esav kitzai befiv. So Yitzchak favored Esav, or loved him, actually. The Torah uses the word Vayehav because he was a hunter. Rivka ohevet et Yaakov. And so already we have favoring here. And as you guys pointed out, they had different characters, okay, but still, many families, kids have different characters. Almost in every family, the kids, each person is a different character. And I think it's the favoritism that is a root cause here. Why? Why did they have each one a favorite child? So notice how the Torah gives a reason for Yitzchak, but does not give a reason for Rivka. You see that?
Yeah.
There's a because only explaining Isaac's favoritism, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it's more logical that way. And for Rebecca, it's almost like there's no reason. She just, it's almost capricious. So I think it makes it worse. So one of the commentators picks up on it. He says, actually, Yitzchak was actually okay. It's really Rivka who's to blame here. So the Seforno, Italian commentator from 16th century, points out. Do we have a volunteer to read?
Okay. Also, Esav, not only Yaakov, even though he must have been aware that Esav was far less perfect than Yaakov. And Rivka basically only loved Yaakov, recognizing the wickedness of Esav. But, again, if you're asking the question, why doesn't it identify why Rivka felt this way? It could be because Yitzchak favored Esav, that the mother then has to take care of the child who's not favored. It could be as simple as that.
Interesting.
Or
I have a different.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It could be that he Yitzchak was Yaakov, Esau and Yaakov was a homebody. There he is cooking the food. He's home. He's with his mother.
So he was actually a shepherd. So but Jacob became a mild man, raising livestock. Yoshev Ohalim. So often people think he's sitting in a tent, sitting in home, and I don't know, studying Torah. The Midrash says, but no, we see in other places in Bereshit, Yoshev Ohalim is raising livestock, which again, it's more mild than a hunter. But maybe in a sense he was a mama's boy, and that's why she took a liking to him. Go ahead, Aaron.
So Shema, I have an idea. I mean, to me, it's very human for parents to favor one child, although they shouldn't show it, maybe. But I think that's human. But in this story, it seems to me that the villain is Rebecca, because she's the one that perpetrated the fraud on
right. Okay. So I want to follow up on your thought, Aaron. So remember, I also talked about it last week. Yitzchak was traumatized in his youth by the Akedah story. It's just horrible to think of what he went through.
Right.
And I would give him a pass for any now discrimination that he shows and not being the best father that he can be. But Rebecca has no excuse. She actually was shown to us in last week's parsha as an independent, honest, good-hearted woman. I mean, they just lavished praise on her through all those 67 verses. Beautiful. And here she's suddenly now practicing favoritism and sowing seed. And then, like you say, Aaron, and then orchestrating the whole plan. But here's the thing. I want to go back even further. Because let's ask ourselves, who started playing favorites? It wasn't Yitzchak and Rivka. Who started the idea of playing favorites among children?
God did.
Okay,
Cain and
but
Abel.
no, among human beings.
Sarah. Sarah did.
Right. Abraham and Sarah with Isaac and Ishmael. So in a sense, Isaac has already seen this kind of behavior in his household when he grew up. And now let's go back to Parshat Lech Lecha, when that favoritism started. Let's analyze that, and that will help us in our Parsha today. So in that Parsha, I think we talked about it one year. Sarah was barren, she could not conceive. She told Abraham, you can cohabit with my maid, Hagar. And then when she conceived, then her mistress was lowered in her esteem. In other words, Sarah was lowered in Hagar's eyes. That caused, but no insubordination. And that made Sarah furious. And she came to Abraham, and Abraham said, well, do whatever you want with her. And Sarah treated her harshly. And then Hagar ran away. And the Torah uses a very strong phrase to describe it. Do you see the slides?
Yeah.
In other places in the Torah, that's oppress. That's just, that's not, that's not hard. That's just not, screaming at her a little bit. That's really abusing her and telling her to do all kinds of very demeaning and humiliating work. And we have different translations of it. I don't want to get into that. We talked about that one year, but I want to bring in a commentary that says this sowed seeds of that later generations had to pay the price for. And let's read, a volunteer to read this commentary. I won't show you who said it. After we read it, we'll see who said it. Anybody want to read this?
Okay, our mother did transgress by this affliction, and Abraham also by his permitting her to do so. And so God heard Hagar's affliction and gave her son, who would be a wild ass of a man, to afflict the seed of Abraham and Sarah with all kinds of affliction.
And who is the author who says this can explain what goes on generations later?
Ben Laden.
This was the Ramban, Nachmanides, who lives in Spain, 13th century, with a lot of problems with the Muslims who are, giving a lot of problems to Jews in the Crusades. I mean, the Christians also murdered and massacred them. But he lived in Spain, and he's basically saying, he's using this idea that we're talking about today. He's saying, what goes around comes around. Abraham and Sarah, their discrimination against Hagar, this led to how the Muslims are treating us today. And she committed a sin. I gave you the beginning in the Hebrew. Chat'a imenu, chet, right? Al chet shechatanu, al Yom Kippur. We beat our hearts and we say al chet. He says, both of them, and mainly it was Sarah, Abraham just gave in. They committed a chet by doing this, and this is what's called what goes around comes around, and that's why we're being afflicted today. So he's trying to explain a historical phenomenon from his day by reading the Bible in a certain way.
But isn't but Shammai, isn't what Rebecca did even worse? Because okay, it's understandable that Sarah would resent Hagar, that who gave birth to a different child, not her child. But Rebecca gave birth to both children, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. But now you'll say, okay, so that was terrible behavior on the part of Abraham and Sarah. But what has that got to do with Yitzchak and Rivka? So actually, I think we can connect the Yishmael story to our story, and it's very interesting because in the last verse of our parsha today, after the ruse, after the deceit, after that happens, we see one final verse in the parsha that's very strange. Why it's there, and this is the verse. וילך עשיו אל ישמעאל, ויקח את מחלת בת ישמעאל. So remember, Ishmael was the one who was banished from Avram's house, who heard from his mother how she was mistreated, how she was oppressed, all the terrible things. And look at this. Esav goes and marries his daughter. So Esav must have heard all those stories. They were passed on to him. He obviously knows him. You don't go marry somebody's daughter if you don't know him already. So he's already heard from Ishmael. He says, here they go again. Here they go again, discriminating against me, just like they did to Ishmael, to his father-in-law, right? By taking his wife, by taking Machalat, her name was Machalat, Bat Ishmael, then Ishmael became Esav's father-in-law. So there's a very strong connection here. And so we can say again that what goes around comes around.
So Shammai, I have to say, I can't appreciate the Ramban's logic, that basically what he's saying is that something that took place generations and generations before that we committed the wrong, that is now the reason that we're being treated badly. But put that aside for a minute. If you follow that logic, then Esav, who is, we believe, the father of Edom,
Right.
all of the things that Edom does to us, including Rome, including just all of the horrible things, again, using Ramban's logic, it's our fault.
It's very problematic.
And that's what the Christians.
100% is very, very problematic logic. It's almost saying, I know God's plans. I have sat behind the curtain with God, and I know how he's orchestrating the world. It's very problematic, but I just wanted to show you what he said, just take it at face. I'm not saying that it's a viable theological explanation of evil in the world. I think it's actually, I agree with you, it's bankrupt. You're basically excusing evil people today or whenever you're living, in Rambam's time or in the Holocaust or whatever, by blaming somebody that did something wrong, and maybe they did something wrong, but now you're blaming the evils of today on somebody who did something wrong in the past. Okay, but I mean, you don't have to persuade me, but I wanted to actually bring this to a discussion about the consequences in Jacob's life. So let's not talk about generations later. In Jacob's life, there was actually clearly a what goes around comes around situation. Look what happened in his life. Do you see the slide about deceit and trickery?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I gave you some of them here. So, and then I want you to complete. So first, he's deceived by his father-in-law, Lavan, when he does the switcheroo. He gives him Leah instead of Rachel. Then the Midrash, this is not in the text, but the Midrash says they themselves, Rachel and Leah, number 2, they participated in the ruse. And let's quickly read the Midrash. The entire night, Leah masqueraded as Rachel. As soon as Jacob arose, he said to her, "Daughter of a trickster, why have you deceived me?" And she responded, "And you? Why did you deceive your father? You think you have a right to ask, why have you deceived me?" Okay, and then but then it
Yeah.
continues. So before I show you that, what other deceptions happened in his life, in Yaakov's life after this? So
With Joseph.
oh, of course. So that's the big one. That's the big one. But there's even one before that. There is even after the switcheroo of Rachel and Leah, Lavan keeps deceiving him. Now it's financial. He
Right.
doesn't pay him properly, and Yaakov complains about that too. So that happens over the whole course of his service, his work for Lavan. And then we go to number 4. Jacob is deceived by his sons and Shimon and Levi with that episode with Dinah in Shechem when they perpetrate the massacre of all the residents of Shechem, and they do that behind his back. And also there's a ruse there. They tell them to circumcise themselves, and they hide all this from Jacob. He's not aware of this, and he gets very angry when he hears about it. But then the big one, the big lie, which caused them to suffer for 22 years, is when they kidnap and sell Yosef and then lie to their father and tell him that he was eaten by an animal.
Yeah.
So
Now, my Rebecca and also Sarah said, go to my family, correct? It's the wife's family to find a mate. Isn't
Right.
that correct?
yes,
Well, obviously, their family is not worth much.
Yeah. And to follow up what Joan just said, in terms of Rivka, she's Lavan's sister. I mean, apples and trees and all that kind of stuff.
right. So looking at his life, we see really an embodiment of this idea of what goes around comes around. But really, what I wanted to ask is, how do you understand that? When you hear that phrase, so right, there's several ways to understand it, even when it's used today. So, in the Bible, you'd probably say it's divine intervention to teach Yaakov a lesson. Okay, your whole life you're going to suffer from deceit, and I'm going to, God orchestrates things that way. But that's very dangerous. Again, like Natalie mentioned, to start thinking, I know why this happened in the world, what God wanted to do with this. Very dangerous, very slippery slope. So I wanted to ask you guys, but we still use this phrase all the time.
And sometimes for good. Sometimes it's if you do a good deed that you think nobody notices, but then it comes around that people did notice. It could be for good.
Right. Okay. And so how do you understand it? Is it just like karma? Do you think of it as is it a hope? Maybe it's when somebody mistreated you and then something unfortunate happened to them. I mean, is it maybe there's a little bit of schadenfreude there? No, I mean, I want to.
Sure.
How do you?
Sure. I personally think that there's another aphorism that's very related to this, but is more apt, and that is that character is destiny. That if a person has a bad character, let's say, eventually they'll do bad acts, but eventually somebody's going to do a worse act to them. Character is destiny.
Okay. So
also, it's a way to explain the unexplainable.
I want to take your idea, Natalie, and say that maybe there's a psychological element here, or an influence, an element of, by you doing a bad act, you've encouraged others to act badly. Yeah. And
but you have the example someone could change, like Yehuda. He once did something inappropriate, but afterwards he changed and he took responsibility.
Yeah. So that too is a what goes around comes around, because you're showing others that you can do tshuva. Right. So it goes both ways. So to pick up on Joan's idea that I don't see it as a mysterious, as a divine retribution, as I see it more as Natalie and Joel pointed out, you influence others with your behavior. You act properly, you act or you do tshuva, that influences others to do tshuva to show that you can change. But if you continue with your bad acts, and then you're influencing others, and eventually it's gonna be like a boomerang. So eventually you're gonna get hurt from it.
Mhm.
But I think, Shammai, that in common parlance, when people say that, they mean if they're religious, this is divine retribution. But most people mean it as karma.
Okay, yeah. There's different ways of understanding it, and that's the discussion I wanted to have. There's 70 facets to the Torah, so Shivim Panim Torah, right? So I think it's a good good opportunity to end our shir today, and to encourage all of us to act properly for whatever reason, whether you think it's divine, whether you think you're going to bring good karma, or whether you're going to.
But I want,
You said your sister had a story.
Oh, is she here?
Yeah.
oh,
Okay. So so we have an extra 2 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, but she's muted.
Okay. Well, I'll give you the. Oh, okay. I'll give you the background. There's a verse in the parsha at the end. Hold on. There's a verse in the parsha that's very difficult, and my sister has a whole story with it. I'll show you the verse. Here's the verse. Do you see it?
Yes.
וישלח יצחק את יעקב וילך פדן ארם אל לבן בן מצואל הארמי אחי רבקה אם יעקב ועשיו. So Tirsa, you want to take it from here?
Is me. Oh.
So in the English, right, Isaac sent Jacob off. He went to Padan Aram, to Lavan, the son of Betuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rivka, mother of Jacob and Esau. What's the difficulty in this verse? And this is after the whole story of the blessing and dressing up Yaakov and all that. What's difficult in this verse? What stands out that's awkward in this verse? Any idea?
All the relationships. We know who people are.
Exactly. And especially, who do we know here?
Lavan.
Well, we forgot that he's the son of Betuel, but who do we know? Like, which relationship here? We don't need any reminder.
Oh, Rivka being the mother of Jacob and Esau.
Exactly. Why? Like, it's almost as if you introduce Rivka at the beginning of the story, that's, or if 1,000 years later you talk about her, but this is coming right after the story. So the most famous commentator, Rashi, picked up on this difficulty, and in a beautiful, typical, honest Rashi commentary, where he picks up on a difficulty, but he actually doesn't know the answer. What does he say? This is his commentary. His commentary is, I don't know what this teaches us. This is saying Rashi, who shares so much wisdom on almost every verse in the Torah, where he reaches a difficulty that he sees, but he doesn't have an answer for it. That's what he says. So I studied this. Here now begins the story. I am just a bit younger than Shammai, and I was sent to a different school than he was sent to. I was sent to what's called Beit Yaakov school in the city of Beersheba in the south of Israel, which is it was a girls' school, and it's of Orthodox, the ultra Orthodox community, and in school, I learned it was with a different kind of community than where I grew up at home. They had some different values, but they very much instilled the love of Torah. So girls, for example, did not study Mishnah or Talmud, but they did study the Torah, the Chumash, the 5 books. We studied it very well, actually better than the boys who went to ultra Orthodox schools. And so when we got to this verse, and the teacher said, look at, Rashi, who, the great Rashi, who doesn't know what it teaches us. That's what he says. I was struck by this, and I came back home and I shared this with my father. And my father said, "I'll tell you a story, Tirza. When I was a young boy in Jerusalem, and we studied this the same verse, and we asked the same question, and we learned the same Rashi. And the teacher said, 'Look, Rashi doesn't know what this teaches us.' There was a boy in the same class of mine," my father said. It was obviously him, but he's talking about a boy who raised his hand and said, 'I know what it teaches us. It teaches us that Rivka, even though she preferred one son over the other, in the end, she is the mother of both.' That's what the Torah is trying to tell us. So my father tells me the story, and I was so moved by this story. The next day I go back to school, to my ultra-Orthodox school, which is, it's very reverent, respectful of the sages. What the sages said, that's our model. We don't ask questions. And we come to Torah class, and I raise my hand and I tell the teacher, my father told me a story where the boy actually does know what this tells us. And I told him the story, and I was expecting the teacher to be so happy that here someone actually has an answer for this. And instead, you can imagine the response that I got from the teacher, which was, "No, Tirza, if Rashi didn't know the answer, how would anyone know the answer?"
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
And
Right.
they done in good spirit, right? It was all done out of love for Torah, but I just it taught me to live comfortably in very different worlds.
Right.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so Shammai, I want the record to note that Bill Eisenberg doesn't buy any of this. Too many times in Torah commentary, they avoid the historic and the basic psychological issues, and they try to teach us a lesson. But it's primogeniture. It's simple. It's happened in medieval times when there's two different sons vying for the kingship, etc. But anyway, that's what Bill feels.
And what Joan feels is that if Rashi didn't know the answer, he didn't know the answer because he didn't want to badmouth one of our founding mothers. I think it says that they look at the family she comes from, and how can you expect anything better?
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining us.
Nice.
That was great. Thank you.
Okay, and
Oh,
again, okay.
Nice.
Stay safe.
Nonsense. All right.
No.